Tomorrow, I think there are four significant events occurring. First, it's Shakespeare's birthday. Second, um, the Pope's body will be taken to the Vatican, and he will lie in state. Thirdly, tomorrow is the Turkish National Day, something that Ataturk decreed. And fourthly, it's the feast of St. George. And I'm just going to concentrate on the fourth point because I think it seems so interesting. It's a curious English paradox that our patron saint, St. George, was not remotely English. He didn't wear armour of burnished steel, nor did he ride beneath the cross of St. George into battle against a dragon in Surrey. Instead, his real story begins, as many fascinating stories do, in what is now modern-day Turkey. So the fact that tomorrow is the Turkish National Day and that St. George's Day is also celebrated on the same day is, I think, an interesting coincidence. And St. George was born in Cappadocia, a region in central Anatolia. He was probably born in the 3rd century. He was a Roman soldier, the son of a Christian noblewoman and a military officer. Raised as a Christian in the late Roman Empire, a time of great peril for Christians, George would have worn a tunic, sandals, and perhaps a Roman soldier's cloak, rather than anything resembling the chainmail or the crusader's helm that is usual in depictions. During the Diocletian persecution, the most ferocious suppression of Christians in Roman history, George was arrested for refusing to renounce his faith, and according to legend, he was tortured horrifically and eventually executed, becoming one of the church's early martyrs. His martyrdom, not dragons, made him famous. So where does the myth of the dragon come? Where does that come from? That tale, dramatic, chivalric, wonderfully medieval, emerges much later. The first records of George slaying a dragon go back to about the 11th century, coming from the Eastern Mediterranean before being embroidered by European crusaders. It was a symbolic allegory. The dragon stood for evil, paganism, sometimes, I suspect, even for Islam. And George, the Christian knight, conquered both spiritually and militarily. The myth spread rapidly through Europe, picking up similar myths in the Book of the Apocalypse, a blend of folklore and religious propaganda. And by the 13th century, the tale had entered the English imagination through translators through translations of the Golden Legend, a wildly popular medieval compendium of saints' lives. But how did a Turkish martyr become England's most celebrated saint? 3 kings take the blame or the credit. The first is Edward I in the 13th century, who adopted St. George as a personal emblem during his brutal conquest of Wales. Edward admired George's military martyrdom, a soldier who defied authority for his beliefs and found in him a noble symbol of divine favour. Then Edward III, during the 14th century, institutionalised George's status by founding the Order of the Garter in 1348, England's highest order of chivalry, with St. George as its patron. And here George was transformed from mere martyr into an elite symbol of knightly virtue. And finally, Henry V, in the 100 Years' War against France, invoked George before the Battle of Agincourt, cried, "God for Harry, England and St. George," Shakespeare's words, securing George's place in English myth through the bard's immortal verse. But before St. George, St. Edmund of East Anglia was pretty well England's patron, a local Anglo-Saxon king martyred by Viking invaders. But Edmund was rooted in the soil of Suffolk, and George, by contrast, was more cosmopolitan, martial, and useful. He was the patron of warriors, a figure with pan-European recognition. And in a newly ambitious England, fighting France and projecting power, George was the image of an aspirational, outward-looking nation. And it's worth pausing to note that George would not have looked English, not a medieval knight with a red cross shield, but a dark-haired Middle Eastern man, probably speaking Greek or Aramaic, loyal to that is ancient Syriac, loyal to Rome and devoutly Christian. He was likely olive-skinned, bearded, completely alien to the Norman fantasy of a knight in shining armour. And our artistic depictions from the 15th century wall paintings to Victorian stained glass are anachronistic and serve a political, not an historical purpose. And so, every 23rd of April, England celebrates a Turkish saint who never set foot on English soil, never slayed a dragon, never knew the nation that would one day claim him. His tale is an embroidered patchwork, Roman tragedy, medieval propaganda, crusading zeal, and Shakespearean flourish stitched together. And perhaps there's something deeply English in that. Our national identity, after all, is a mosaic of migration, Saxon, Norman, Celtic, and imperial. So why not borrow a saint too? So as we chant the phrase for England and St. George, let's understand St. George not as myth, but as man, a Christian martyr from Turkey, brutalized for his faith, transformed by time into a dragon-slaying emblem of chivalry, a saint who speaks not only to English pride, but to the universal yearning for courage, for justice, for steadfastness in the face of tyranny, and who also, incidentally, therefore, also speaks for the importance of migration in transforming and improving a nation.